Жизнь требует энергии. Жизнь.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Web Dev Simplified.
Ever wonder what silence looks like? It's not empty.
Each moment's a treasure, like this sweet morning dew. In this journey of our hearts, it's just me and you. In this fast lost race of time, it's right up here. That I'll hurt always on the way to stay up in the train. In this lonesome night, under stars so bright, will we find our way? I feel the echoes of 1,000 dreams in the shadows that sway. With every breath to travel strong, with the breeze in the front. We know start to the deepness, this soul's here onwards I light. In this lonesome night, under stars so bright, will we find our way? I feel the echoes of 1,000 dreams in the shadows they sway. With every breath, the smoke grows high, painting tales in the sky. We'll find the dawn together strong until morning lights cry. Underneath the memorial solitude, the hearse skies. On the silent horizon, it's a shade our hearts. Light it down, let's cross the flame like a high rise. As the lines of the face of the faith and the in this lonesome night, under stars so bright, we will find our way.
In today's video, I'm going to be teaching you everything you need to know about CSS positioning, so by the time that this video is over, you're going to be positioning elements like a CSS god. Let's get started now. To demonstrate all 5 of the different CSS properties for position, I have a simple example set up. We have a parent element, as well as 3 childs inside of that parent element, and right now there's absolutely no position styles being applied to them, only these default styles for coloring it. And if we come in here and we want to inspect one of these elements to figure out how the position is being applied by default, we can go to the Computed tab, we can search for position, and if we see right here, our position property is set to static by default. And static is the default position that all of your HTML elements will have when they enter onto the page. And essentially all static positioning does is it says that it should follow the other elements in the document flow, so whatever comes first in our HTML, for example, child number 1 will be above child number 2, and so on. So static positioning is just like how your HTML works when you type it out, and it's what you're most used to. The next CSS position that we want to cover is relative position, and this works almost exactly the same as static positioning. So if we go in here and we want to change our green child here, child number 1, to be positioned relative, and we save that, and you'll notice absolutely nothing over here has changed. And that's because relative position acts exactly like static positioning, but it allows you to do 4 specific things that static positioning does not. And that is that you can change the top, left, right, and bottom of this element. So let me just show you an example of that. We can come in here and we can change the left, for example, to 10 pixels. If we save that, you see the element moves itself over 10 pixels. It even overflows its parent by 10 pixels on the right side. And that's because relative allows you to actually change the position of the element relative to where it normally would be in the document flow if it was statically positioned. So as you can see, normally this 1 would take up this space here inside of the parent, but because of the left 10, it's moved over 10 pixels. And for example, if we put top here to be 10 and save it, you see that it actually overflows the elements below it. Because relative position, when you apply top, left, right, and bottom, it actually takes that element out of the document flow and moves it down or left or right or up those 10 pixels that you specified. And the reason that this element 2 and 3 are not actually being pushed down when this top element is being pushed down is because, like I said, it was removed from the document flow, so it no longer works just like a statically positioned element. You can see here that the position where 1 normally would be is taken up, and that is reserved for where 1 is, and the actual element 1 is just moved by these top, left, right, and bottom elements that we applied to it. In general, you're almost never going to be using top, left, right, and bottom on a position relative element, because all that does is move your element out of the document flow, and it becomes really difficult to style things around it, since as you can see, our element 2 is now no longer in line with 1, so we would have to also position the relative number 2 exactly the same, and then we'd have to do the exact same thing with number 3, and so on, and it gets really confusing when you start using that. So in general, position relative is not actually used for using top, left, right, and bottom. The next element that we want to talk about for position is absolute, and that one most definitely gets used with top, left, right, and bottom. So let's put an absolute on here, remove our top, save everything, and you can see that already things have changed drastically from before when we had no position. This is with no position, and then position absolute. And as you can see, the document actually completely ignores this one element right here. It just pretends like it was completely deleted. And for example, if we go into our index.html here, and we delete this one element and save it, all of the rest of our elements work exactly the same as before. We add it back in, you see nothing else moves except for that one element. And that's because position absolute completely removes the element from the document flow, and everything else renders as if that absolute element didn't even exist at all. And that is crucially important. This makes position absolute really useful for when you want to stick something in a specific position, but you don't want anything else to move around it. And as I mentioned, position absolute allows you to do top, left, right, and bottom to it. And you'll notice if we put a top on here of, let's just say 10 pixels, something really weird is going to happen. If we save that, you see that this element is actually 10 pixels from the very top of our screen. If we set this to 0 and save, you can really see that it's just at the very top of the screen. But why is that? Shouldn't it be down here, 0 pixels from itself? And that is incorrect because that's what relative position does. Absolute position absolutely positions an element inside of some parent container that it can reference. So you would think it would reference this parent, but this parent is positioned static, which means it can't have anything else positioned absolutely or relatively to it. In order to change an element so that you can position something absolutely or relatively to it, you need to use one of the other positioning elements of either relative, absolute, sticky, or fixed in order to make an element position absolutely inside of it. So if we change parent here to position relative, which this is the most common use case for position relative, you'll see now our absolute position element is relative to the position relative parent. And this is where relative is really useful. It's when you want to absolutely position something inside of it, you need to make sure that element has position relative. Otherwise, that element will just fall back to the next relatively positioned parent or all the way back to the HTML element itself. So this is where relative and absolute play really nicely together. So just to reiterate the positions we've gone over already, static is the default, relative is exactly the same as static, but you can relatively position it to itself using top, left, bottom, and right. And then absolute is just like relative in the fact that you can position it relative using top, left, right, and bottom, but it completely removes it from the document flow so that all the other elements ignore it completely. And relative and absolute play together nicely because any element that is relatively positioned can have absolutely positioned elements inside of it that'll be relative to that relative position element. And that works for every position, not just relative. We could change this here to be absolute as well, and you can see still that one element is relative to the parent because the parent has some other position than static. And that's really important. Anytime you have a position other than static, absolute elements will use that as its parent that it's absolutely positioned inside of. So let's remove that because we don't actually want this. We can keep it as relative. And now we can move on to the next type of positioning, which is fixed positioning, which is very similar to absolute positioning, but there's some caveats regarding it. So let's change this to be position fixed here and save it, and you see immediately it completely ignores this relative position parent and moves all the way to the top. And that's because fixed position elements are always fixed positioned based on the entire HTML element. It has nothing to do with parents. Also, something really unique about fixed position elements is they stay in the same place when you scroll. So let's make our page very large. We're going to change the height here to 200 view height so it'll be able to scroll. And if we save that, we can scroll down. You see that this one element still sticks to the very top of our page because it's got top of 0. For example, if we put the right to 0 as well and say that you can see it sticks now to the top right, no matter how far we scroll. But absolute does not work that way. If we change this to absolute, you can see it's in the top right here, but if we scroll, you can see it stays there. It doesn't actually move when you scroll, and that's the big difference between fixed and absolute. Fixed moves with the page as you scroll and is always in the same exact position on the page, and also it positions itself based on the entire HTML page and not just the parent that has the correct positioning, relative, absolute, etc. on it. And those are the real big differences between absolute and fixed. And now the last position that we need to cover is position sticky, and I'm not going to go super in-depth in position sticky because I have an entire video covering it, so if you want to check that out, make sure you check the description and the cards for this video to find that sticky position video. But essentially, sticky position is a combination of both relative position and fixed position into one. So let's go down here to our child 1. We're going to make this sticky position. We'll get rid of the right, we'll just have top here. And if we save that, you'll see it looks just normal, just like it was relatively positioned. But as we scroll down, as soon as this element hits the top of our page, since we have our top set to 0, it'll become fixed position now. And as you can see, as we scroll, it stays fixed to the top of our page with that top of 0. And that's really the power of sticky position, is by default, it's relative, but as soon as it scrolls outside of the page, it becomes fixed position. And that's it. Position in CSS is really that easy. You have the default static position, you have the relative position, which works just like static, but you can move it based on itself, absolute, which works just like relative, but it's moved based on its parent element, that is using position, relative, absolute, sticky, or fixed. And we also have sticky position, which works just like fixed and relative. And lastly, fixed position, which allows you to put an element on the page and it'll stay there no matter where the user moves to with the scroll wheel. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and have a little bit more understanding of the different positions inside of CSS. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below letting me know what other videos you want me to make in the future. Thank you very much for watching and have a good day.
Tired of vibe coding? And the big problem with vibe coding is you can't find where the Python error is.
Приложении Prior Business без посещения банка от 0 белорусских рублей в месяц.
Жизнь требует энергии. Милдронат 250 миллиграммов для...
Once upon a time, I was making a website for a client. The client had a designer and this was the design they wanted me to code. It was pretty standard, almost everything is Flexbox, and the idea was that the website was floating in space. Then the designer thought that his design needed more space elements, and so he sent me 5 images that I was supposed to position in strategic places to deepen the illusion of being in space. Positioning these images directly on the page would break the layout, so I needed a way to position them without moving other elements around. To start using CSS positions, we first need some elements in our HTML. All I have is a div with the class of container and 12 items nested inside of it. Each item is a div with the class of item and item 1, 2, tree, and so on. When I save, we see we actually have a grid. This is because I have some base styles in a separate CSS file. None of this is relevant to CSS positioning. You don't need a container with 12 items, and you don't need a grid to start using the CSS positioning properties. All of this is just for demonstration purposes. In a fresh CSS file, I'll select the first item in our grid by its class name and give it the position property. In total, there are 5 position values: absolute, relative, fixed, sticky, and static. When I set the position on our item 1 to absolute, we see that an item from our grid disappeared. We have 1, 3, 4, 5, and so on, but we don't see item 2, and this is because it's hidden underneath item 1. To move item 1, we can use the top, right, bottom, and left properties. These properties are unlocked when we assign a position property to an element. If I give the top property the value of 0 pixels, we see now our item is positioned at the top of the page. And also the reason we're missing an item from our grid is because when we set item 1 to have a position of absolute, item 1 got removed from the grid. Actually, it got removed from the entire document. Elements that are assigned a position of absolute are removed from the document. No space is created for them, and other elements will behave as if that element never existed. If I set left to 0 pixels, now our item is on the top left corner. If I set the bottom to 0 pixels, nothing happens. This is because it doesn't make sense to have both a top and a bottom. I can comment out the top property, and now with the bottom of 0 pixels, we see that the element is positioned at the bottom left corner. The same goes for the left and right properties. I use one of them, but not both at the same time. I'll comment out the left property and set the right property to 0 pixels. I'll also comment out the bottom property and set the top property to 0 pixels. Now our item is positioned at the top right corner, but what happens if I give our top and right properties some negative numbers? I'll set both to -50 pixels, and now our item is half visible. This is pretty cool, but we've got some horizontal scrolling. I can select the body and give it the overflow X of hidden, and now the horizontal scrolling is gone. Did you notice whenever we were defining values on the top, right, bottom, and left properties, that those values were positioning item 1 relative to the entire page? -50 pixels on the top and right properties places item 1 at the top right corner of the entire page. If I wanted item 1 to position itself relative to its parent, then we need to select the parent and give it a position. Any position value will work except static, because static is the default value. I'll set the position to relative, and now we see item 1 is being positioned relative to the parent instead of the entire page. The way this works is over on the HTML, item 1 is asking the parent whether it has a position property. If not, then it asks the next parent, and then next, and then next, until it finds one with a position property defined. And if it doesn't find one, then it defaults to being positioned relative to the HTML element. Now that item 1 is being positioned relative to the container, it's stacking itself above item 5. If we wanted item 1 to be layered underneath item 5, what we can do is use the z-index property and set it to -1. Back on my client's website, I give the planet the position of absolute. The planet is now removed from the document but is stacking above other elements. I use the z-index property to layer the planet underneath the other elements. Also, I give the planet an opacity of 0.3 because the planet is way too bright. I played around with the top and right properties until I was happy with the position, and I also added an overflow X of hidden on the body to remove the horizontal scroll bar. And finally, I repeated the same process for all the other images. If I select item 1 and give it the position of static, we see nothing happens. If If I give it a top property of 0 pixels, nothing happens. If I set it to 1000 pixels, still nothing happens. Nothing is happening because static elements don't have access to the top, right, bottom, and left properties, nor do they have access to the z-index property. On the other hand, if I set item 1 to have a position of relative, we see again nothing happens, but unlike the static position, relative has access to the top, right, bottom, left, and z-index properties. If I give it a top property of 0 pixels, it doesn't move. However, if I set it to 100 pixels, we see it pushed it 100 pixels away from the top. If I give it a left property of 100 pixels, we see now it pushed it 100 pixels away from the left. Unlike the position of absolute, elements with the position of relative remain in the normal flow of the document. Use relative when you want to keep your element in the normal flow of the document, and use absolute when you want to remove your element from the normal flow of the document. On the footer, I want to push this animation slightly towards the right. Normally, I would just use a margin left, but in this case, I can't, because I set the width and height with percentages, and if I use margins, the animation would shrink. So what I can do is give the animation the position of relative and use the left property to push it slightly to the right without it shrinking. The two final positions are fixed and sticky. They both stick an element into position, but they do it slightly differently. Fixed actually behaves very similarly to the absolute position. Like absolute, elements with the position of fixed are removed from the document. So when I set item 1 to a position of fixed, we get the same behavior as we did when we were working with absolutes. Item 1 was removed from the entire document and is currently layered on top of item 2, which is why we don't see item 2. However, one area where fixed is different than absolute is when we start scrolling. We see item 1 is now following us when we're scrolling the page. The second area where fixed differs from absolute is, unlike the absolute element, a fixed element is always positioned relative to the HTML element. I can set item 1 with a top of 0 pixels, and this will stick it to the top of the page. I'll also give it a left of 0 pixels, a border radius of 0, a width of 100%, and a z-index of 1. Guess what? We now have a header. I can also have it be a bottom header by replacing top with bottom. And now we have a bottom header. The sticky position works similarly to both relative and fixed. I'll select item 5 and give it the position of sticky. We see nothing happened, and also if I scroll the page, nothing is happening. But if I give it a top of 0 pixels and start scrolling, now item 5 is scrolling down with us until it hits the end of the container. Sticky only works when we define a top property. The value we put in the top property represents the space before the element will start scrolling down with the page. If I set top to 50 pixels, now the space between the element and the top of the viewport needs to be 50 pixels before the element starts sticking to it. The client requested a bottom header indicating that the website is still under development, and also requested that the text in the builder section stick to the page when scrolling. To create the heading, I add a div with the class of bottom heading. I give it the position of fixed, the bottom of 0 pixels, the left of 0 pixels, the width of 100%, a background color, and a z-index of 1. Then for this section to stick when scrolling, all I have to do is give it the position of sticky and also give it a top property. After all these changes were made, I had a happy client and he left me a nice review on Upwork. And this is pretty much everything you need to know to start positioning things yourself. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.
즐거움에 취하고 무명의 낯선 도시로 떠나도 나를 닮은 사람과 내 불안한 미래 그 사이쯤 잠을 자고 손을 비벼 건물 틈새를 디뎌 먼지 덮인 얼굴을 씻어내려 해도 무릎 끝에 던져진 많은 사람 영과 일 어디쯤에 서로를 보고 있어 별을 지나 Have a good ride bon voyage 다른 시간에 만나게 될 거야 닿지 않더라도 나란히 우린 걷고 있어 넌 나의 모든 날 세상에 맞선 네 어깨를 위로하고 빛은 어둠을 달래고 두니까 난 너를 따라 이 터널 끝을 걷고 있어 별을 지나 Have a good ride bon voyage 다른 시간에 만나게 될 거야 닿지 않더라도 나란히 우린 걷고 있어
Если кашель вмешивается в планы, Гербион приходит на помощь. Гербион помогает справиться с кашлем, разжижает и облегчает отхождение мокроты. Кашель планам не мешает. Гербион нам помогает. Доступен в форме сиропа и постилок.
Зарал борется с причиной перхоти.
I know many of you think I'm AI. I'm not AI, but this is AI. Maybe in the future I'll get
Alright, so today I want to talk about all the CSS math functions. Now this includes min, max, clamp, and calc. All of them have their own special little things about them, but all very useful things that we can use in our CSS to dynamically change the value of numeric properties. So I've got a very simple page here. I've got floated images inside of paragraphs. I've got a header that's got an H1 and an H2. And that's it. That's the whole page. And what we're going to do is we're going to dynamically size the fonts. We're going to dynamically size the images. And then we're going to create some columns, and we're going to dynamically size the columns. So let's sort of start with these two right here, clamp and calc. So let's jump right in here. And we're going to look at the font size and the line height for the paragraphs. So this bit of text right here, and actually all the paragraphs, we're going to dynamically size this stuff, and we're going to make the line height adjust as the fonts adjust as well. So we'll start off with the font size, and we will use the clamp function here. So instead of just saying, okay, 1.2 rem, great, my base font size in my HTML tag, I've got it set to 20 pixels, so my fonts for my paragraphs are 1.2 times that, but they're always going to be 1.2 times that 20 pixels. It's always going to be the size. I want to dynamically change that. And I'm going to replace this with the clamp function, replace the value with my clamp function, and it's going to allow me to provide a default starting point. So let's say 4VH. And actually, let's bump up the font size here for you guys. There we go. So I'm setting 4VH, 4% of the viewport height. That is my default value. So whatever the screen size is, right here, the total from here to here, the total of my viewport, 4% of that, that is going to be my starting point for my fonts. Now, I also want to sort of bound it. I'm going to say, okay, here's the minimum value and here's the maximum value. So if it's below, as this 4% gets smaller and smaller as the screen gets adjusted, I'm going to set a bottom limit of 0.8 rem. So it's not allowed to get smaller than that size. And then on the other side, if I've got a really tall screen, there's only so big I want to make my paragraph text, so I'm going to set that to 2 rem. And this is the range. Here's what I'm aiming for. This is going to adjust depending on the size of the screen. Here's my smallest, here's my largest. So we'll save that, jump back in here. You can see my font is bigger than it was before. And as I adjust my window, my viewport height, you can see my fonts will change size. The line height, the space between the lines, stays the exact same as this adjusts. So we're going to adjust that next, and we're going to use the calc function for that. Okay, let's jump back in here. Line height, we'll comment that one out, and we're going to use our calc function. Now the calc function is just like the name implies, it does calculations. You can put in different numeric values with different units, and it will calculate what that is meant to be. So I can say, all right, my line height is going to be 1.2 rem plus, so that's 1.2 times that 20 pixel that I set in the HTML tag, plus 4% of the viewport height, or some other value. Not using the same units. So as I shrink this and grow this, it actually is changing, not just the font size, but the line height is changing as well. If we play around with this, let's see.
Tired of vibe coding? And a big problem of vibe coding is you can't find where the Python error is.
So I'm adding 1% in there. There's very minor space differences. If I made this 10%, you can see that it's calculating, and it's dynamically calculating that space. All right, I'm going to put it back to 4. There we go. So that's clamp and calc. Clamp, you get your default, you get your smallest, your largest, so it bounds the upper and lower ranges. Calc, any sort of value that is numeric, any units that you want. And you can use this for transforms when you're talking about degrees as well. You can use that as part of this. All right, next I'm going to move on to my images, and I want to talk about the max function and the min function. So let's come in here and I'm going to change this width. Right now I've got it set to 50%. So this image is 50% of this space, the paragraph. I'm going to change that. Instead of just being 50%, I'm going to provide, let's do the max one first. So we can use this max function, provide two values for it. And if I said 50%, comma, 300 pixels, I'm saying which is the largest of these two values. So as your screen changes width, that's going to change how big 50% is. So it's going to pick the larger of these two. It's kind of like saying, just like this. With the one command, I'm sort of giving values for these two things. I'm saying it's got to be at least 300 pixels, but 50% is what I'm aiming for. So always make it 50% until you get down to this 300 pixel point, at which point it becomes the minimum. You're not allowed to go below that point. So play with that. Going down, 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 shrinking until it hits 300 pixels. And now it can't get any smaller than that. So it will grow and grow and grow. I want the biggest of those two values, 50% or 300 pixels. When 50% becomes less than 300 pixels, we keep the 300 pixels. So that's the max function. Same sort of idea. We're taking two values inside of here, and we can pass in 50% and 300 pixels. This is going to be equivalent to writing. So same sort of idea as we were doing before, except now we're saying the smaller of these two values. My maximum is now 300 pixels. But once we drop below that, save this. So 300 is the biggest, but when I go below that, I'm allowed to go down. So 50% of the width or 300 pixels, whichever is the larger of the two. So these are our two different ways of doing it. And both of them, it's like replacing these two lines. All right, last one I wanted to talk about was the min-max function. And the min-max function works with grid layout. So it works with the grid template rows, grid template columns, or the grid auto properties. So in my header, I have here an H1 and an H2. I'm going to turn these into two columns and show you the min-max working with those columns. So inside of our header, I'm going to set display to grid. And we'll set grid template columns. Now, we could, at this point, just say, I'm going to make it 2 fractions and 1 fraction. So H1 is taking up 2/3 the width. Right here, this is taking up 2/3 of the width. This is taking up 1/3 of the width. And as I resize, it's always going to be that ratio for the two parts. We can, with min-max, come in here and sort of say, okay, we've got 2 fractions, but I also want to cap that. I want to give it a lower and an upper bounds. Same sort of thing that we were doing before with the min width, max width, or the min and the max. We're saying this is the smallest that I want to get. This is the biggest that I want it to be. And I'll just throw a few properties in here just to align these things because they were working as rows. There we go. So I'm just going to center them vertically and space them evenly across the two. My H2 is still going to be 1 fraction, so 1/3. And then we've got 2/3 until it gets down to 400 pixels. Then it's not allowed to get smaller than 400 pixels. So there we are. We've got the thirds. But then we get to the point where that heading is now 400 pixels, and it's not allowed to get smaller than 400 pixels. And that's why this other content, the H2, is spilling out from inside of here. So we've got a min and a max value. Smallest, largest, and then a fixed size, effectively fixed size, for the H2, for the second column. It's a fixed proportion of the page. All right, so that is all of them. So we've got the min, the max, min-max, clamp, and calc. All of them very powerful. Have some fun with those, experiment with them, because really using them is the only way that you're going to get it into your head exactly how it works all the time. I can talk and give example after example after example, but really playing with them yourself is how you're going to really wrap your head around them. All right, so I hope that helps. If you want a copy of this code, it's linked to down in the description. And as always, thanks for watching.
Расчетный счет для вашего бизнеса уже в ваших руках. Откройте счет для индивидуальных предпринимателей.
Время джинс-феста в Коллинз.
Жизнь требует энергии.
Наслаждайся вкусом с Pepsi.
Curious about what CSS variables are, how they work, and how you can use them in your projects? Well, you're in the right place. Let's go check them out. Hi there, my name is Kevin and welcome to my channel where we learn how to build a web and how to make it look good while we're at it. This is the beginning of a deep dive into CSS variables. CSS variables are amazing. They're really, really cool. I'm happy they're here. Browser support is almost amazing. And this video itself is just the start of a mini-series or a deep dive into CSS variables. And in this video, we're just looking at what they even are and how you can start using them in your projects today.
Okay guys, so before we get into how to actually write your own CSS custom properties, the first thing I want to look at is why they're really cool. This is just a really simple site that I've come up and built with, and I've used my custom properties to build this out. So here we can see I have this dark color. Now let's just say I change dark to red. It's going to change here, but it's also going to change everything down here because I've used that property in multiple places. If you're used to Sass variables, this might seem really familiar with you. There are a lot of similarities, but there are some big differences between them as well. So just another example here is section padding. Let's say I make that 0. Everything is going to stick together. Now you might say, well, I just put that in one spot. So here I have my section padding, I have my section padding, I have my section padding. So I only have to change it in one place, and it's going to change throughout the site everywhere that I've used it. So you can probably see why that would be really, really useful. And just one last thing just to show you here, we also have this white color. So say I change my white over to red, it's going to change the color of this text, this over here, and my background color there all at the same time. So it just makes it so we don't have to try and hunt down things, either just using like a find and replace type of thing in your code editor or hunting them down manually, which is, oh, that's terrible. So let's go over to this, and this is the same thing, but with no custom variables used anywhere. And we can look at how we can actually write one, and it's really easy to do it. The one thing you have to do is you have to define it inside of a selector. So if you're used to something like Sass, you can just make a variable. It doesn't have to be inside of something. But with CSS custom properties, they do have to be defined, and that's because they're custom properties. They act as variables, but just like font size is a property, we're making a new property. We're inventing the property. But our browser knows what font size is, so we can easily change it for us. It doesn't know what our custom property is, so we have to define what it is while we're creating it. So what I'm going to do here is, so just in my body, I could actually declare them there, but where you're going to see the most often declared is root. Now, if you've never seen root before, it's going to the root element of your page, which is always pretty much in any HTML page will be your HTML element. The reason we put them on the root, it's a bit higher specificity than putting HTML, and it also just, it's convenient to group everything together in one spot, so it just keeps it all together. And by putting it on as in your root or your HTML element, what it's allowing you to do is they're becoming global properties, so you can use them throughout your site, because as we're going to see, these properties cascade down. So to define a variable, it's really easy. Or a custom property. I'm going to call them variables now just because that's what everyone calls them. The first thing is 2 hyphens. So you just do hyphen, hyphen, dash, dash, minus sign, whatever you want to call them. I do 2 of those, and then I write the name of it. So I write the name of my variable, I put a colon, and then I write the value that I want to give that variable. So it's always going to be name and value. So it's just like writing your own, font size. You're writing the property, you're writing the thing here, and it's these 2 dashes that let the browser know it's a custom property and not a normal property. So let's just say I come in here and I say my primary color is 456, and so now I've defined my variable primary color as #456. Now I want to actually use that in my document. This is where it's a little bit heavy to write, I guess. I wish they'd come up with a better syntax, to be honest with you, but that's okay. Let's just say on my body here, I want to use it. So I can say color, and now I want to use that custom property, or I want to use my variable. So I'm telling it it's a variable. So I put var, open and close parentheses, and inside the parentheses, I write the name of my variable. So I do hyphen, hyphen, primary color. And it's a little dark, you probably didn't see a change. Let's just make it red so we can really see it going. There we go, and you can see that it's all changed. It just works like that. Now, one thing that's really important to know about about these, as I mentioned earlier, is that they cascade, just like anything else. And again, that's why we're writing them in the root. We want them to be global things that we can use anywhere in our document. Because let's say over here, I have this little intro thing. So let's say I come in here and I write I'll put it at the top. If you're going to do them, inside a selector, I'd say to put them at the top just to make them easier to see. So let's say I make a secondary color here, and we'll call this one, I'm gonna make this one steel blue. So now what I could do is in here, I could say that the color of my text is var, and secondary color. Color. And you can see up here, this is the only thing I have in my intro, and that's changed to my secondary color. And then I'm going to go, oh, well, you know what? I'd like all of this stuff to be that as well. So there's my sales points. So let's come down here and do sales points. And in here we'll do color is var secondary color. And it doesn't work. I'm also getting an error, but there we go, it's gone. So this isn't working, and it's because I've declared this secondary color inside of intro. That means I can only use it inside of intro. I can't actually use it anywhere else. So for something like this, it is important to know, and this is why we generally don't declare them inside of selectors like this, because it gets limited to this area. So what I'm going to do is, one thing you will notice is it doesn't break the site. One thing with Sass variables, if you're used to using those, if you put in an invalid one, your Sass won't compile. With this, it's just going to ignore it. It's going to go, oh, I don't know what this is, so I'm ignoring it. It would be the same as if you did like padding 50 pixels. I misspelled padding. It doesn't break my CSS file. It just doesn't know what this is, so it ignores it. So one nice thing with them is if you made a mistake somewhere, whether it's a spelling mistake or something else, it will still work. Well, your site will still work. It's just that one property will not work. You can also create like a mini fallback. So you can say if secondary color isn't working, make my text yellow.
How does payroll feel with deal? Like fluid, effortless global processing without the handoffs. Deal.
That's another option as well. So I want it to be secondary color, but if for some reason this isn't working, you can put yellow. This could be useful for troubleshooting problems, because if secondary color is working, it's going to ignore this. So if in this one, which is my text here at the top, if I add yellow here, it's not going to change because secondary color is working. So it's using this one first, and then if this doesn't work, it's going to use this one. Over here, this isn't working, so it's falling back to yellow. So this could be useful for just debugging issues. You could throw in this and see what happens, and you could find any mistakes, either spelling mistakes or badly declared variables or whatever it is. This does not count for browser support. We're going to be looking at browser support in another video. But we'll get rid of that, and we'll get rid of this. And I'm just going to take this secondary, and I'm going to do a cut, and let's move it all the way back up, go to my root, and declare it down here. And now they've all changed. Yay! So that's why we usually declare them in the root. One thing that you can do, which is interesting, is you can overwrite things when in different places. So let's say here on my H1, we're going to say actually let's just do it on all of them, H1, H2, H3. We're going to give them the color of var secondary color. So they've all changed. And intro, we're going to take this off for a second. Okay, so all of my headings now are using my secondary color. And we're going to make it so it's only that, just so we don't have any confusion. There we go. So we can see all my headings are using the secondary color, which is this blue color here. Now, one thing that I can do is inside of different areas, I can actually redefine what my variable is. So here on my intro, which is this text that's up here at the top, right now, my whole site is seeing secondary color as steel blue, and my H1 is using that secondary color. But what I could do is I could say in my intro, secondary color, whoops, Oh yeah, that's right. Secondary color is green. And you'll see it actually changed it only here. This is the same behavior as if you had your body. You put, or here I have a font size of 0.9, and then I go on my sales points here, and I say the font size is 1.5, right? In that area, the font size is going to get a lot bigger because I've overwritten my body's font size. The exact same thing is happening here. I'm overwriting the secondary colors, what the property is. So everywhere in my site, it's steel blue, except my intro, it's green. And then I could come on this one and I could say that in here, secondary color is actually yellow. And it's going to change these ones to yellow. Now, this can have its purposes, but please do be careful with it, because it's not... You're sort of defeating the purpose of using the variables in a way if you're redefining them throughout your site, and it's going to make it just as hard to go back through your site to fix them. But it is important to understand that they cascade just like everything else does with CSS. But in general, and we're going to look at an exception for this when we get to one of our videos where we build out some stuff. So just be careful with this. There are cases where you want to do this, but it can be a dangerous proposition at times, and it also defeats the purpose of using variables if you're just redefining them constantly. The whole point of these is so you can have everything defined in one spot, and then you can automatically change it or update it as you're going by only changing one thing instead of having to dig through all your other things. Whereas if you have variables defined everywhere, what's the point, right? So just try and keep them as much as possible and where it makes sense in the root, because that's where they're most useful.
And that's CSS variables in a nutshell. I hope you learned something. If you did, please leave a comment down below to let me know. Hit the like button if you like the video. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you can get new videos like this every single week. In the next video, we're looking at how we can use CSS variables in a more concrete example instead of something like this, which is, I think you probably have a good idea, but something a little bit more complex. I look forward to seeing you there, and don't forget, until then, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.
friends. Today I have an important message to share with you, and it's important enough. I'm fighting a cold right now and all of that. I'm feeling kind of miserable, but I felt like it was worth it to issue sort of a public service announcement of sorts, where I want you to stop wasting your custom properties and the awesomeness that are custom properties. Because people always do it like this, where we have, some custom properties all set up in the root, which is awesome. That's fine, no problems with that. But then if we look lower down in my code, we'll find stuff like this. So here, like on these sort of background thingies, I did them as custom properties. So then I'm putting the colors in there, and then I have the icons that I need to change the fill on for each one of them to have the right color. So I'm changing the fill of each one like this, and this is fine, it works, but it's a little bit annoying, and we end up with a whole bunch of selectors we don't actually need. So how do we improve on this? How do we use custom properties in a smarter way that leads to more maintainable projects and easier to deal with code bases? Well, it's actually pretty simple, and I'm actually going to delete all of this that I have right here, or let's comment it out actually, just in case we want to reference it a little bit later. And we're going to dive in here and make some code. So let's hit save, and you can see all of those colors disappear. And let's go back up now to the main selector I have for my plans. And let's look really fast here just to get an idea. You can see I have these three that are set up. Very typical. We have the plan and then a modifier here that I'm using to control the colors and potentially make other changes if I had to. Inside each one of those, I have my icon at the top, I have my title in there, just a paragraph, my price, and a button down at the bottom of each one. So nothing too complicated in the HTML. So the plan is for each one of these. And the first thing I would recommend when we have elements, especially like this, or components or different things, where you might have different colors for each one. This could even be for like your pricing tables. There's so many different things that this could apply to. It could even be for lists and other stuff where you have like different icon colors. There's a lot of different places where we could do this. I'd recommend using a locally scoped custom property. And we're going to be exploring the idea of private properties, or this term comes from Leah Veru, who called them pseudo-private properties, as an idea of sort of stealing from JavaScript, where we just put an underscore here to sort of indicate that they are private properties. And I'll put a link to her article where she first explored this idea in the description if you want to read more about it. But on my plan here, what we might want to do is, well, we had those two colors that were coming in, and that background color was like that pseudo element, but it sort of looked like a shadow, like, some sort of weird shadowy thing. So let's just call that shadow. And the other one that we had on there was our icon, so we can just say icon like this. And we obviously need to apply something to each one of these. And again, this is just saying this is sort of like a private property. It's something that's unique to my plan. It's not something we find up in our root, that we're just, we're dealing with this locally right here. And what we're going to do here is actually use a custom property as well. And this can seem a little bit weird, and I'm going to call it shadow. But I'm going to give it a fallback, right? Because right now shadow doesn't actually exist anywhere. I ideally wouldn't have that maybe existing somewhere, but we'll talk about why this could exist in the root as well and why that's okay. And for now, let's just say red so it really stands out and we see it. Or, those were actually a bit faded. So we'll go with pink on those. And then here, my icon, we're going to do the same thing, var of icon. And then on this one, we'll say that the default is red, just so it has a fallback that we can easily see. If this wasn't a demo, I would probably make those black, but you can make the fallback whatever you want. And because shadow and icon don't exist anywhere, these are the values that are going to be used if ever I use these anywhere. So let's go on that plan icon that we have right there, and I'm going to say that the fill on those should be my var icon. And we can see that that's working fabulously right there. And then we can actually do the same thing. Let's go to that pseudo element that I had over here. So there's the plan before. And in this case, let's just say that the background is my var. And in this case, we called it shadow. And you can see that's coming in right there. Why is this better than doing it this way? And then we have the, it's kind of weird. We have this double name, and I'll get to why is it shadow and shadow? We'll talk about that. And if you've been watching my videos for a while, this isn't exactly how I've been using this idea of the pseudo private property, where I usually don't bother with this side of it, but it makes a lot of sense. And I want to share how Vera explored this idea. So now we can go down to here, and here we had to have the selector for my before of each one of them. And then we also had to have the selector of the icon for each one of them, which is a descendant selector, which some people don't like having. Instead of all of that, I could just come and have my plan param. And on that one, I do that my shadow is going to be my var. And then here we just say that it's my color yellow. And in this case, my 300 refers to the right one, and we can see it switched over. And we'll set up the other one too, which is my icon. So icon would be var color yellow 400, which is my darker yellow or more vibrant yellow, and we can see that comes in. And the reason this is working is if we come back and take a look here, we have the shadow, which is looking for a custom property of shadow without the underscore. And if it can't find that, it will go to pink. But as soon as we declare one, now we actually have a shadow and it's going to work. And the advantage too with this is I don't have any setup, but I could, if shadow existed in the root, it would use that default value that's in, or we'll call it default, it would use the cascade. It's being inherited into the plan, and that shadow variable would work. But then if we did redeclare something new in a more locally scoped thing like I'm doing here, it's going to work for that as well. So we can take my pram, let's set up the next one. So the next one here is my bike, and that one, I think for the two of them, is my cyan color. And then I can take these two. And what I really like about this is my rocket. There's I guess the main thing that I really like with this is I only need one selector and I'm controlling things that are inside of there. And of course, we don't need to stop here with this sort of thing. Like we have these buttons that are on here and we might want to make some changes to those as well. And that's a little bit where things can get more interesting here. And we're going to look at how we can actually change these shadows to be a little bit better and advantages with the custom properties on that as well, and a few other things. But let's start with these buttons right here. So if I know that I want to make my button something that changed, like say it's a different hover color every time I'm hovering on one, I can come and create one of those. So we're going to say our button hover, which will be our var button hover. And then here, let's just make it red again. It doesn't have, again, I wouldn't do this for production necessarily. Or actually, you know what, let's come here and do this as another custom property, because this could be a valid fallback as well, where we can look at my color text, which is the current color that I have in the background there already. So if you ever want for fallbacks, there's no harm in referencing back to other things. The pink and the red here might not be great areas to start with. You could have better fallbacks. And that way, if there is no modifier, you're still getting something that's perfect. But when the modifier comes on, that's when you're getting different situations or different things that are happening. So now what I can come down and let's set up my button to be able to do this. And this is one area we will need a descendant selector. And one of the reasons I like this is because I can keep all of this the same, and I have one class that's controlling all of these changes that are happening. I don't have to come onto my button and say, oh, this is a button yellow, and then this one's a button blue, and that one's a button purple, or I have to worry about naming or anything like that. I just have my pram, my bike, or whatever. This might be yellow, blue. Name those things the way you want. But then I'm not worried about modifying anything inside of there. I'm not modifying my icon class, or I'm not modifying my button class. I'm just relying on this one selector that can handle it all. So let's come and actually we'll do it right here. So we can have then my plan, and any button that's inside my plan can get these. And we'll look at why this is nice. Because actually, just really fast, if I did this normally, I'd have to have my plan, pram, and then button, or have the modifier class like I said, and then have to have this for each one of them. It's really annoying to have to repeat that every time I want that modifier to affect the button that's descendant inside of there. So in this case, we just say that I have my plan button hover, and we'll do the plan button focus as well. And for this, we can just come and say that the background color is my var button hover with the underscore here. And it's important when we're declaring it, we're using the private property version of it. So this is sort of setting the stage up. And then when we use it, then we can just use the non-underscore version of it. If you don't like that idea of having that fallback in there, you could probably approach this in a slightly different way. It's just the main idea here is take advantage of your locally scoped custom properties. So you definitely don't need to set it up exactly like this, but there is this nice benefit of having we can rely on the cascade, but sort of break the cascade where we need to. And it sort of just denotes as well that where this is getting declared. My button hover should be something that I can find on my plan. It's not something I would go necessarily to find in my root. So we get my button hover that's right there. So let's hit save, and it should still work perfectly fine because that is going. Let's just go look really fast. That's looking at this. It can't find that, so it's going to the fallback really fast. If I made this my yellow 400, we can see that they've gone to that yellow. So they're relying on the fallback color right now. So we'll go back to the text. So it has a nice default fallback. And then when we want to set it up, well, I don't need any new selectors. I don't need to worry about anything like that. I just come and this one, the color of the text is going to be terrible on this one, but I just say my button hover is, we can just duplicate this actually, right? So we just add that in there and we can come on each one of these, switch that, and this one would be my cyan, and then this one can be my purple. And now the hover color for each one has switched over without having to worry about it. I just come in here and I have these options. They become like levers that I can pull for the interior of what's happening within this element, which is just so nice. The other big advantage, and one of the best things with all of this, is the way that, and this is really nice with transitions and animations as well, when you need to make like small changes to things. But let's come and look at, I have this before right now as a pseudo element that I set up here, and I sort of needed to do that because I have a shadow on here, right? I have like a soft shadow, and when I first saw this, and actually I got this just so you know from I Code This, which is a website by Florin Pop, who you might know. And so it's a site that has like daily challenges that you can try out, right? So every day there's a new challenge that opens up. It's completely free to join. If you join for free, you get the daily challenge every day. And if I do the start challenge, I can actually work on it within the browser. It's all here. I can do the challenge, save it, submit, see other people's solutions and stuff. It's a really fun site. I'll put a link to it down in the description, just so you know it is an affiliate link. So while you can join for free and do the challenges every day for free, if you do decide that you want to unlock more stuff and get the pro challenges and some of the other things that are available to you, then I'd get a small commission from that. So you'd be helping to support my channel at the same time, which I obviously appreciate very much. But if you don't know them, very cool site. But yeah, as I was looking at this, when I first looked at it, to me, instead of creating a whole pseudo element, that makes more sense as a shadow. But then I needed that softer shadow on the inner bits as well. And the reason that presented a problem was if I take this off, and I have that soft shadow that's already on there, right? So we have the plan, and then I have my shadow. If I wanted to have a second shadow on here, I 100% could. So let's come here and add a second shadow. I'm just gonna put a comma, and so I guess it'd be like -1 rem offset in both vertical and horizontal, 0 blur, 0 spread, and for now we've been doing red as our example. You can see it comes in and it works exactly like I'd want it to. The problem now is if I want to change this box shadow with the modifier class, I have to come in and redeclare the entire box shadow, right? So I'd have to come on my plan param and have this one and change this one just really fast. We could do that one as yellow. And I have to redeclare the entire thing, even though the only thing that's in here that's actually changing is the color of the shadow, like the color here, nothing else. All these values, everything else is identical. And then I'd have to do the same thing on this one and make this one cyan. And then I'd have to do the next one and change the color of that one. And that's annoying when we have to redeclare entire things. And I'm sure if you've done animations or transitions, you've done this as well, where you have to like at a different animation stop, you have like a stop in your animation. You might have to declare a whole bunch of stuff, especially with transforms that you've already done that aren't changing from step to step, but you just have to have it there so it doesn't overwrite the existing thing, because we don't want it to overwrite the other box shadow, right? And then get rid of that soft shadow that was on there. We need to keep both of them. So that was actually why my custom property is called shadow too, because I saw it as a shadow. But if we're using locally scoped custom properties, I can completely do away with this, and I can just come in, and this would be my var shadow. And of course, I want to be doing that pointing at my private property, so with the underscore, and hit save, and look at that, it just worked right away. So that's really awesome, right? And the reason I like this is personally I find it a lot more maintainable and easier to deal with because there's a lot less code going on. I just have to pull those levers that I want. And so like that's really good. And also just really fast, if I kept those as pseudo elements, I had a -z index on them to have to pull that that background backwards, but that could actually be really bad because if I had a background set for like the area here, I'd actually lose it behind that. It's annoying dealing with -z indexes, so using a shadow also solves that problem. But another thing that makes it, and another reason that I really love this, and I've talked about this, I keep going on about it, but let's say I come in and I add another one here, and it should be in my list, but just for styling purposes, let's leave it outside, just so it's nice and big at the bottom. And we want this item to be like, this is the important one, right? So it's my light speed, and it's a bit bigger. So I have this one, and this one I have my plan light on there. So I'm using the exact same HTML, The only thing I'm doing is changing one class here at the top, nothing else through the entire thing. I update my text, and then I just come down and let's just duplicate that one right there, change this over to my light, and I don't have any custom properties set up for an additional color because I'm not forward thinking enough with these demos all the time. And then maybe this icon and this one can be lime, and then this one can be like a light green. And we get those colors that come in, and everything updates. My buttons updated. Again, the text color, I'd have to come in with something that could update my text colors too. But everything just comes in and updates without me having to do a lot of work. And of course, I'm doing this just with colors right now. This is not limited to only colors. You could be using this for absolutely any custom properties that you have set up and you might want to change that are within. And that's, for me, the real best part of locally scoped custom properties is you're dealing with the parent and you can have as many pieces inside that are all being controlled with one nice simple selector when you do need to make changes. And if you enjoyed this video and you like just general CSS tips and tricks and things like that, you might really enjoy this video that's right here as well, where I look at how you can actually transition or animate from a height of 0 to a height of auto with CSS only, and it's not even really that hacky or anything, it just works, it's awesome. And yeah, so check that out if that sounds interesting to you. And with that, I would really like to thank my enablers of awesome, Andrew, Michael, Simon, Tim, and Johnny, as well as all my other patrons for their monthly support. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.